welcome along. Thank you for joining us. I know Friday afternoons are a bit of a funny time, so appreciate you taking the time out. The plan is that we're going to share some information about what we're up to in forensics, where we're incorporating co-production into our practice, and we were going to take a quick look at a couple of pieces of work that we've got going on at the moment. In terms of questions and things as we go along, we're happy for you. Pop your hands up if there's something that you think of in the moment and you won't remember later on, or feel free to put it in the chat. But the plan is that there'll be some time at the end for us to have some discussion and see where people are at with things, if that sounds okay. So shall we cover who we are first then? So I'm Betsy Walker. I'm Allied Health Professionals Professional Lead for the Mental Health Services and Care Group, which rolls off the tongue really nicely. So I look after the AHPs that are working in forensics, eating disorders, health and justice, and our prisons. And I'm an OT by profession, but the other half of my role is working in forensics, looking at our lived experience workforce, co-production, recovery college, and the activity that's going on over there. And I'll hand over to Ollie.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, hi everyone. My name's Ollie Kane. So I am the professional coordinator for Forensic Recovery College and Education within the Forensic Directorate. So I cover our medium secure unit, which is based at St George's Hospital in Stafford, and I also cover our low secure unit, which is based at the Redwood Centre in Shrewsbury. And I am going to talk a little bit about what we do as we go through the day. Okay, so on to the next slide.
Yeah, and just before we move on, I think just an important point for us to lay out a disclaimer right from the off. Ollie and I are not the experts on this topic at all. Yeah. We do have experts in the trust that are in working with Mel Ball, our director of co-production and lived experience, and the involvement team. We work closely with them, but this is kind of a reflection of where Ollie and I are at and the work that we're doing over in forensics. So I don't want you to kind of take this as a we've got all the answers. This is a bit of a sharing of our learning so far.
Indeed. And that's the thing, you know, we've worked on this ourselves. I mean, Betsy, you've done it a lot longer than I have, but we've really been focusing quite heavily on this work over about the last year and a quarter, to give you a bit of context. But on that note, I will hand over to Betsy.
Need to take care of initially what do we mean, what are we talking about when we're using the phrase co-production. A few kind of bit of information on this slide, but really we're talking about these two principles to kind of hold in mind as we're talking through what we've got planned for the next hour. So key to co-production is working together as equals. That's bringing together service users, staff, carers, everybody that's involved in using and delivering the service, with the intention of being able to make improvements and do the best that we can for the people that are using services. And then the other really important principle is around sharing power, which is where things might look and feel slightly different to perhaps more traditional models that we might be familiar with. So the being able to come around the table together, making decisions, having discussions, really getting into the detail of what might be a different way of doing things. So there's that example there of the sort of thing that you might have had experience of, but a scenario where staff and service users are coming together to create a new initiative, peer support group in this example, that's led by service users. Staff are supporting in the way that's needed, and the sort of decisions about what that's going to look like and how it's going to go are made together. So we just encourage you, while we're going through this, everybody, I'm absolutely sure, will have experience of having co-produced pieces of work, be that with colleagues or with users of services. It might be that it falls quite naturally in your role and it's stuff that you're conscious of, or it might be things that are just part of how you work and it's less specific. But hopefully this will bring some of those things to mind for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a great point to reflect on as we go through our talk today. Just to give you a bit of context here, we're going to give you a bit of a quick history on co-production, and this has kindly been provided by Jonathan Gibbs, who I don't think can be with us today, but he is a lived experience development worker in a service called Reach Out, who are our provider collaborative. That was quite a mouthful to get out, that was. So Jonathan has kindly written this up for us, and I will go through that now. So what is co-production? And where did it come from? So the term co-production was first used in the 1970s by Eleanor Ostrom, an economist at Indiana University. She introduced the concept to explain why crime increased when police officers stopped walking the beat and began patrolling in cars. When on foot, officers built relationships and exchanged informal knowledge with the community. This collaboration was found to be vital for community safety. Ostrom argued that services work best when they are co-produced, that is, when professionals and communities work together as equal partners. So co-production itself is more than consultation or service user involvement, which we'll talk a little bit about later. It's not another word for patient and public involvement, volunteering professionals working in partnership with each other, or inviting someone to a meeting to share their story, quote unquote. Instead, co-production is a genuine partnership between publicly funded services and those who use them. It's about sharing power, making decisions together, and valuing lived experience as equal to professional expertise. So in 2019, a national NHS project explored how co-production can align with improvement and experience of care. And when they did this included a literature review on how co-producing improves service quality, site visits to different NHS organisations that were already embedding that approach. And as they went round, the conclusion was clear. Co-production isn't just an initiative, it's a shift in how we think and work.
May well have seen this before. It's not a new idea, but it's an image really to just sort of try to pull together in one place the different ways that we might work with people and the different ways that we might engage people. So ladder with the bottom section being doing 2, middle section doing 4, and the top section doing with. And I think just it's really important to say as well that we're not suggesting that the bottom of the ladder is bad and the top of the ladder is good. It's just about identifying what the different ways of working look like and helpful to have them together. In reality, we all know that there's different stages of care and recovery that will require input in all of these ways at different stages, and there's a place and a need for all. Maybe with the slight exception of coercion, we probably would think slightly differently about that, but certainly there's times when services need to make decisions for people. And we might see that more in very acute settings when people are very unwell and interventions are needed to stabilise people. Then the middle section of the doing 4 is probably in reality where we see most of our work. So doing 4 people, but with input around consultation, engagement, informing, etc. So an example of that might be if we were sharing a new policy with a group of service users, looking for their views, but the policy's already been written, fundamentally agreed elsewhere. There might be some scope for some tweaks and there's input in that way. But the big decisions have already been made. It's the kind of bringing to doing 4 rather than designing together. And again, in reality, this will often be a really appropriate and valuable level of involving people. So we're not saying that that's not right, just that co-production looks slightly different. Then the top section, that doing with, is where the power starts to shift and all around the table have an equal voice and the opportunity to influence the design, the decisions, the plans. But it doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't mean saying yes to everything. It's about having the discussion openly and being really transparent about what's happening, where requests that are being made are going, what the feedback is, that kind of thing. So the ladder can be helpful to help identify the type of engagement that we're seeing most of. It might help prompt us to think if we're missing some opportunities where we could perhaps bring in more elements of co-production, co-design. It can also be a helpful way of just mapping out what we're doing as a service to sort of take stock of, have we got a balance of all types, or is there not very much further up the ladder, that kind of thing. So why are we doing this? What's in it for us? Co-producing a change can be the real difference between a great idea on paper and something that actually works and helps people that are impacted by the change we're making. I think we've all got an experience of something new that sounds great, but then when you put it into practice, it doesn't actually work for the people it's been designed for. I think any of us that have been around in the NHS for a while will be able to think of the odd occasion when that may have happened. But it can often lead to a new solution or a new way of working, rather than a repackaged version of what we've done before. If you've been around for a while, you'll be familiar with that feeling of, oh, we're back here doing this again. And what can often come from co-producing something with the users of the service is genuinely coming up with a new approach to things and new ideas that can help bring about some different change. I don't think any of us want to be part of solutions that don't work. So people who use services often have really good ideas and might be better at coming up with things that will solve the problems. And I mean, I think we can probably all relate to having that experience of when you're using a service regularly, that it's those sort of sources of frustration when you're like held on hold on helplines and that kind of thing of, why do they do it like this? Why is it so unnecessarily complicated? That when you're using something, you often can see a different way that things might work. It's also worth noting as well, particularly for those of us that are answerable to a professional body, that co-production is featuring more and more in national strategies and professional standards that we're accountable to. For example, with the other part of my role for AHPs, it very much features as a key enabler in the AHPs Deliver strategy that we're working to currently.
Absolutely.
And then bringing it back to what we were going to talk about more specifically about what does all this look like in forensics, and that the reality being that there are challenges to this way of working. If it was fab, then why aren't we doing it all of the time? And it's because it's not easy. There's certainly challenges in forensics. There'll be challenges in any environment that you're working in, but there's something to sort of things to think about, the power imbalance that is implicitly there in a secure and restricted environment. The reality for our service users is that they're detained, pretty much all of them against their will. Virtually everything about the environment is being controlled by the service and by the staff that are working with them. So co-producing, doing with, doesn't always feel like the most natural fit. And the default for the service is often going back to that sort of doing to, doing for. So we find that sort of making the commitment to co-producing more takes a real sort of conscious commitment to doing things in a different way when those opportunities are there. It's also keeping in mind that there's a need to manage the risk, security, safety, and that can limit how flexible we can be sometimes with solutions that are brought to the table. So it might be that there's a really good idea that comes up from a service user forum or something like that, but isn't able to be implemented because of the risk and security on an individual ward. But it's always good to keep reviewing that and going back to it. It can feel uncomfortable, is a reality, that moving from a place of being used to being in a position where as staff members we hold the power cards and ultimately are making the decisions, to shifting to being open to your idea not being the one that is run with, that hearing about what's not going so well isn't always easy and can be challenging in that respect. And then in terms of keeping things going, it's creating that momentum and keeping it there can be really tricky, because this sort of work isn't for everyone. There's lots of reasons why someone may choose not to get involved in the opportunities that are there, or they may want to for a while, and then as they progress in their recovery they decide that they don't want to do that, they want to move away from services. So we quite often find that we'll have a period of time when we have a really core group of people that are really involved and signed up to it. They move on and it's back to the beginning again of building up that interest again. So all challenges to work with in forensics. So we thought we'd just sort of share a couple of sort of top tips really from our experience to date of the work that we've been doing. I don't think there'll be anybody on this call that isn't familiar with the challenge of not having enough time to do everything that we need to do, but certainly time is the enemy for this type of work. Definitely find that meaningful co-production is, you just have to, if you want to do it with any quality, you have to allocate a really good chunk of time, because it's accommodating people's different needs, different ways of working. Might be used to being able to sit down and work for an hour and a half in a meeting, but that's probably not going to work if we're going to co-produce, needing to break it down, think about people's different learning needs, communication styles, that kind of thing. So allowing time is really important. And sometimes it's better to, if there's a really quick turnaround required for a project, it can actually be more impactful to do a good quality piece of consultation rather than a rushed piece of co-production. So that's something to think about. We've touched on the sharing power already, and the being open to a new direction. And I like that quote from Einstein. I think it says it all, really, doesn't it? But certainly that's the spirit of co-production, I think, of kind of being open to going in a new direction. The faux production it's not my phrase, but I like it. I heard Mel Ball talk about it. I don't know whether it's hers or whether she got it from somewhere else, but faux production or tokenism is another phrase that you might hear. But sort of keeping an eye out for when that crops up. We can find ourselves in positions where really well-meant initiatives can lead us down a path where we've tried, but perhaps things didn't go in the way that it was intended. An example of this might be, and it's a fairly classic example that I've seen many times and I've been involved in. I'm not saying I'm perfect on this at all, where it might be a situation where we invite a service user along to a decision-making forum. There's loads of professionals present. The service user hasn't been briefed sufficiently, if at all. They've just been, do you want to come along to this? We're going to be talking about something that might be of interest to them. They're expected to represent all service users from the whole service when they're one individual. As a result, they have a pretty rubbish experience. They don't understand where and how they participate. They contribute very little, but the project is able to tick its box to say it was co-produced, which, you know, it wouldn't really be fair to say it was, but you know, in terms of that idea of faux production, something to be aware of and look out for. And time can definitely be a driving force in some of those kind of decisions, leading us down some of those decisions that aren't helpful. Okay, so this is our first example of a piece of work that we're doing over in forensics of what does this look like in practice and how can we embed this more and move forward. This one piece of work is our co-production promise. So this is an invitation to all service users and staff at all levels, in all roles, to think about these asks that are listed. So we're asking people to champion co-production, believe in it, support it, spread the word, be open to learning, challenge and doing things differently, approach work with honesty, integrity, respect, safety, and work together as equals to make real changes. What we're inviting people to do is think about those areas and then reflect on what that looks like and what that means for them in their role, because there's different opportunities for us all depending on where we're working, what we're doing, and also for service users. So, for example, I'm going to pick on Simon Lloyd. I think he'd probably be on the call somewhere, but as head of wellness, his opportunities are going to look very different to a newly qualified nurse working on one of our wards. A mix of level of experience, the level of influence in roles, opportunities of who people have contact with, all of those kind of things. But the principles will remain the same of holding in mind those asks in the work that we're doing. So the hope is that with some information and these commitments as a prompt, it's going to help people to identify their own individualised commitments. Our next sort of phase of it is as people sign up, they're going to get a nice badge. The logo is there, the co-production promise. And we're hoping that that's going to serve as an indication to others that if you're wearing the badge, you've signed up to the co-production promise, you're somebody that's going to be open to suggestions around building co-production into a piece of work, or you'll support discussion if that's raised. And we're trying to kind of get to a point where we've got allies rather than tumbleweed. If you kind of stick your neck out and make a suggestion, that there'll be people in the room that will run with that with you and offer some support. And just as an example, in sort of as we were talking about the time scale of these pieces of work, this idea came from a working group that's co-producing and implementing our involvement strategy. And what we found is that this has taken the best part of a year from the point when we had the idea to do it to being, have worked up the ideas and have had the necessary conversations, taken it out to the wards, involved different people, so that we can be at a point where we're now in the process of launching it and rolling it out to boards and teams.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And it's been, we've had some really, really good conversations. And as Betsy's just touched on there, that we've sort of done a bit of a tour of all our forensic wards with a bit of a different presentation that touches more on what co-production promise looks like in forensics. And we've had some fantastic response from that, and it's something that, as we've talked about, time-wise, will be an ongoing project for us. And whether that means that we'll engage steering groups, we'll retour the wards, we'll have one-to-ones with people that are allies in this sort of work and network with other professionals. This is a project that will certainly take some time, but so far so good. So on that note, I'd like to introduce to you what we've been doing in the Forensic Recovery College. So a bit of background first. Some of you may have heard of our Wellbeing and Recovery College in MPFT. Essentially what we are is we're an arm of the Wellbeing and Recovery College, but we specifically focus on the forensic inpatient population. So we're a learning space that's built in our secure settings. So, we design what we do around the principles of recovery, co-production, as we've just talked about, and also lived experience. So courses that we will be running, they're co-delivered by professionals and people with lived or carer experience. So, the courses that I'll touch on in a little while and give you some examples, they aim to inspire hope, promote choice, and support personal growth. A lot of our guys within our services may have come from very disadvantaged backgrounds. They may have not ever really had the chance to engage in this sort of work before. If they've been in a prison setting, that can be extremely restrictive, and you can be really stuck with the amount of sort of opportunities around yourself learning. And our setting is sort of now aiming to really expand on how people reflect and come together. So we're open to all service users in forensic services. So it doesn't matter if you're on a PQ or a psychiatric intensive care ward, or you're in a rehab ward. It's open to everyone to come to the table. So our sessions, they offer a non-clinical educational environment where experiences are shared, skills are developed, and recovery journeys are supported. And again, talking a bit about how that links back into co-production, we work with people. We don't work for people, nor do we work to our direction, as it were. The idea of the Forensic Recovery College is that we value every voice in the room, and we do stuff like get steering groups together, talk to our service user involvement reps, as I'll talk a little bit about shortly. But yeah, it's not about us saying we've got 5 courses that we want to run with you guys. It's not like programs in the prisons, for example, where it's a mandatory thing. It's a totally optional thing for people to join, and the importance is that you're just there, you attend, you're part of a community, and if you learn something along the way, then we've done, we've smashed it, as it were. Okay, so where are we at with it at the moment? So we're quite a small team over in forensics, as you can imagine, and there's a small amount of us that are working on this and have been for the last year and a quarter or so. So we have the following team members to support our co-production, development and delivery. And as Betsy touched on earlier, we also link in with working groups to, sort of help nudge this work forward. So, of course, as you've met today, we've got Betsy, our AHP lead, got myself, so I'm the professional coordinator for the college. We have a fantastic advanced peer trainer that comes from a forensic lived experience background, Bev Howard. She was going to join us today, but sadly she's had to go elsewhere. But hopefully, if we do more bits and bobs in the future, you guys will be able to meet Bev. And we also have 2 peer support workers in forensics that not only share their lived experience, but they also help out with projects within the Recovery College. So that's Richard Keatley and Michael Gooley. And in terms of what our team is doing, we, as I say, it's been a year and a quarter. And as we've touched on, true co-production really takes time. And we've got some fantastic results so far. So what we've done so far is we've sort of beginning to create our first offer of courses across all of our wards. We're currently co-producing ward rep training and recovery focused courses for carers within the trust. And we're also involved in a project with our partner collaborative, which we call the Expert by Experience Forum, where our service users get to come to meet lots and lots of different service users and professionals from sites like St Andrews in Birmingham, Birmingham and Solihull themselves. There's people from Coventry and Warwickshire and MPFT involved. And it's a space that service users and professionals alike get the opportunity to really network and share their stories based on different topics every month. Just a quick overview on that. But we're also working really hard as part of a Forensic Recovery College to embed co-production. So when I say that, I mean that with service users and staff as well. And today's session essentially is part of that. It's spreading the awareness, educating and informing so that, you know, we can make co-production a bigger part of the valuable work that all of us do every day, because it can feel, as we've touched on earlier, like a challenge. But in actual fact, what you often find is when that fantastic little nugget of truly co-produced work comes out, whether that be like a ward initiative, a group, or some sort of quality improvement initiative, the real impact of it being properly co-produced and made as equal partners, it's fantastic. So I'd like to share some sort of development and course examples of what we'll be doing over in Forensic. As I touched on earlier, we're very closely partnered with our Trust Wellbeing and Recovery College, and some of our courses will mirror what our Wellbeing and Recovery College do. They pop out a prospectus every term, and we will do the same for our guys within Forensics. So some of the courses may overlap a little. So some examples of stuff would be, we'll be running a series of understanding and living well with mental health conditions. So, you know, that may be stuff like learning more about the condition and strategies to manage it, understanding your care plan. So stuff like how to be involved with and better understand a care plan, ensuring that care plans are more co-produced. And that's something we're working on also. Stepping into volunteering, so we have a few different opportunities within the Forensic Directorate. So that could be stuff like stepping into a role such as being a ward service user rep, where you come to a bi-weekly or monthly meeting and you're the face of the ward essentially as a service user. You get the chance to be able to come share our guys' voices in a forum, learn new things, engage in recovery college work, and take stuff back to the ward. And that's something that we're actively working on at the moment. So stuff as well like mindfulness that the Trust Recovery College do. So that's stuff like staying present and reducing stress. And later on, we'll be looking at doing stuff like planning for the future after discharge for our guys. You know, that more holistic work around what's your life going to look like outside of services. Let's have a look at all the aspects of what may come, you know, and share those challenges in a safe group setting. There's a couple of other bits we're working on also. So we're actively developing our approach to involvement and inclusion across our forensic services, as we've touched on today. So we're quite actively involved at the moment in revamping our service user involvement groups. So we're kind of redesigning how these groups work and ensuring that they're meaningful, inclusive and accessible. As we've talked about today, you know, co-production it's a lengthy process, it's a challenge, but what we need to do in forensics is ensure that if you're, for example, coming to a service user rep meeting as a patient, and it may be your first time, for example, that needs to be accessible. You need to be able to come into that and feel confident, feel happy, feel safe, that you're in an environment that people, you know, are safe to share things, are safe to talk about things, and there's lots of little bits and bobs of work that we're doing to make sure that happens. We're also co-producing training for our ward reps. So we did a bit of an audit some time ago of our ward reps who told us stuff like they felt confident to come to involvement meetings, but they didn't necessarily feel confident to communicate, nor did they feel particularly confident in being able to engage on the wards. And that wasn't all of the ward reps, that was just some. But, you know, it's ensuring that we take their feedback and bring that back to those meetings so that we can build their confidence, make sure communication is effective, and those guys feel empowered to do what they do. We're also making sure every voice is heard. So we're working to make sure not only ward reps, but also other service users across the Forensic Directorate are reached all the way around. So from the ground up, all the way to senior management. So, you know, that could be stuff like ensuring that service user voice is heard with clinicians, senior leaders, and service improvement teams. We're also looking at improving accessibility with our speech and language therapy teams. So stuff like our wardrobe agendas, for example, and resources being co-developed with our speech and language therapy team at the moment to ensure that they're clear, inclusive and easy to engage with. So we had quite a wordy agenda some time ago as an example, and what we've done, rather than keep that very sort of small font, wordy little box agenda, we've turned it into a nice sort of, this is what we've talked about last time, and this is what we're going to do about it. Nice and simple for everyone involved. And we're also connecting, as part of our service user involvement groups and beyond, with our We Are Equal forum within the Forensic Directorate. So Richard and Mick, they do some great work as part of the We Are Equal forum, which is a forum that sort of revolves around equality, diversity and inclusion, and representing different events that go on throughout the year. So stuff like Diwali or raising autism awareness, as an example. And our guys, they engage our ward reps in dynamic ways. So, they will get together as a service user group, bring presentations and different talks to our ward reps and beyond to educate, and this happens through presentations around sort of world equality, diversity and inclusion topics. Okay, over to Betsy.
Okay, so as mentioned, we're not for a minute saying that we're the experts in this, but we've just included this to signpost you to where the experts are within the trust. So I would imagine there's probably quite a few people on this call that will have already worked with folk like Ellie Dunbar and Louise Crompton, particularly as our rep and specialist for from the involvement team. But yeah, contacts here really helpful, and it's helpful to know, be aware of, if you're not already, that there's lots of work happening across the trust that's being coordinated by Mel Ball and the team around developing our trust-wide co-production strategy and making sure that everybody has opportunity to input into those. So if you'd be interested in hearing more about that, then by all means drop us a message or link in with the senior people in the services that you're working with. They'll probably be aware of it.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're also more than happy to share out this slide or any bits and bobs that you might want, because as you can see there, we've got email contacts, and we've also got, there's a form that you can request support from the co-production and involvement team if you're interested in this sort of work but you haven't necessarily yet touched on it. Those guys, as Betsy's rightly said, are the experts who can really help you out with any projects that you might be thinking about. So just a quick one on this one. This includes some links that you guys can sort of have a look at in your own time, but I just wanted to include some practical examples of co-production in healthcare settings outside of forensics. So number one big sort of co-production project that went on was what we call the Kent Medway Thrive project. So that was a maternal mental health service that co-produced with peer support workers who have lived experience of birth trauma and loss. Their initiative emphasised inclusivity and addressed barriers to accessing support services in that setting. As I say, you're more than welcome to have a read of the case study when the slides are shared. We've also got the Carers Trust case study, so a compilation of co-production practices in health and social care, including the development of a dementia support carers card, co-designed staff induction processes, patient and family collaboration in cancer care services, and there's some examples there that you guys will be able to access. And that was actually one thing I didn't touch on earlier, is that within the Forensic Recovery College, we've got a co-produced carers course that was co-produced with professionals and one of our forensic carers who really kindly brought her story to the table and really worked with us to put a meaningful sort of course together that carers, will be able to easily sort of engage in from the ground up. And if anyone would like to know more about some of the projects we're doing, please do feel free to reach out to us. And last but not least, the NHS England Co-Production Resource Toolkit. So this toolkit offers guidance on implementing co-production in healthcare settings, including models, postcards with inspirational quotes, and a quality assurance Venn diagram. And that's available, as it says there, on the NHS England website. we've talked quite a lot today, and what we'd invite you guys to do as we sort of open up the floor in a minute is take a moment to reflect. This may help you sort of base any questions or discussion you'd like to have with us. It'd just be really nice to know, what part of today's session resonated most with you, and if you've ever seen any examples in your workplaces of true co-production, or on the other side of things, times that it was missing. And it would also be nice, to know and reflect on what would it take to bring more co-production into your role or your team, and what might feel challenging about that, and what support do you guys think would help. And as it says there, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. It's just a space to think, essentially. And I'll hand over to you guys now. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Betsy?
No, I think we said we'd leave some space at the end, so
I'll stop sharing.
If there's anybody that wants to jump in.
But also, if I just would say, if you don't want to speak up, unmute yourselves. We're also happy to take questions in the chat, or any reflections in the chat. I know it can be quite horrible when there's like 50 people in a room and you don't want to unmute your microphone. Jo?
Hello, I am from forensics, so people can tell. But maybe I suppose I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, but also just to reflect on what a sort of tricky journey we've been through in forensics to kind of get here, and how uncomfortable it's been to kind of realise that a lot of what we were doing wasn't really genuine co-production, and just to kind of say really that it's good to see the journey on its way.
Yeah, definitely. And even myself and Betsy have discussed in the last year and a quarter that I've been working here, that in the early days there were mistakes made. It was like that. Sometimes what you'll find, on reflection, is that you're so keen to get in the room that it can be very easy to walk a tightrope between consultation and co-production. And as we've touched on as well, we are a very small team, and we are very time limited on what we can do sometimes. So there is sometimes a place for work to be sped up and expedited a little. But when it comes to our sort of service user group, and I don't just mean our reps, I mean the whole of our directorate, that's where we are really learning now, and also taking the time to make sure that our guys get the absolute best from that. Has anyone else got any bits and bobs they'd like to add? Simon?
Thanks, Ollie. I suppose question, what are the biggest obstacles or barriers, do you think, in relation to co-production? And I'm thinking from an organisational point of view, because you're right, Betsy, my promise will look different to, say, Fran's promise over on Willow, for example. So I'm just thinking, what are the biggest barriers that you see, and how do you think people can influence them?
Do you want to take that one first, Betsy, and I'll tandem?
Yeah, if you want to go first, and then I've got some thoughts.
Okay.
I expect Jo will too.
Yeah, from the last sort of year and a bit of being boots on the ground with this work, it's, for me, there's a couple of things, and we've touched quite heavily on some of those already. So time constraints being one, definitely. When we're stretched thin between wards, it can be quite hard to keep the flow going, and I'm sure that'll be the case in other teams as well. That if you've got allies that are working very, hard on spreading the word, as it were, and getting people involved in co-production, if you've got to work across quite a wide space, it can be quite difficult to keep that momentum going, because in our service, as I've kind of touched on, we work with a lot of guys who have not been engaged in this sort of work before, and if you haven't got a constant presence, it's quite easy for it to fizzle out sometimes. So the momentum is a big challenge. And I suppose also one of the other big challenges that I've found is education of everyone as a bigger group. So we, as I was touching on earlier, we've been around the ward and toured a bit and talked about co-production a couple of times now, actually, on each ward. But when I think when I've talked to people on a sort of face-to-face basis around co-production and what it looks like and the benefits it offers, it can sometimes be quite frightening for people. And I don't mean that in a patronising way. I mean that in more that if you're really, really busy already as a nurse, for example, or an occupational therapist, and someone comes along and is like, oh, can you help us? You know, we're doing these projects. This is what we're about. Would you like to be involved in that? It can just feel like another sort of weight on your shoulders, you know. And I think I've seen it in the prison service as well when it comes to, you know, getting people in the room round a table, is that people feel, I haven't got time for this, and I haven't, you know, and also I'm not really sure I can offer anything. You know, so it's sometimes about breaking down those barriers and being able to educate and inform and help people build a confidence. Over to you, Betsy.
Thanks, Ollie.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I was going to say that the sort of three things on my mind, Ollie's pretty much covered the first two, time and money. That just having more resource in terms of staff resource to build the team and be able to devote more time to this work, because it is time consuming to do it well. The other one is probably more complex in lots of ways, but I think one of the things we struggle with is creating the right opportunities for our service users to develop skill and be exposed to the right kind of experiences and opportunities, so that over time they get to a point where they feel comfortable and confident in some of the spaces that we would like to be able to co-produce more, so we can scale things back and we can grade them down so that our current service users are able to engage in a meaningful way in them. But sometimes there's higher level meetings, there's strategic things going on that, you know, they're busy, lengthy, complicated meetings to take part in. And I don't doubt that there are folk that have been through forensic services that are more than capable of being able to take on those roles. But at the moment, we really struggle to create the opportunities to get them to that point. And like we said, you know, it's not unusual for people that have perhaps been really engaged in this work as an inpatient, then move on to the community. And thank you very much. I'm done now. I don't really want to see anything to do with forensic services again. That's the plan. And completely understand. So not everybody that would be capable actually wants to go on and do that work. They want to go and get on with their lives elsewhere. So that's the thorny one. Time and money seems easy in comparison to that.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of my questions about how transferable this is. So there's we've got a lot of colleagues here from community services, and Rachel and Claire are here from our integrated offender health liaison diversion type things. And I suppose it's, how do we replicate some kind of recovery college which supports individuals who are engaged with, say, our outreach services, and sort of like that liaison and diversion is one of the questions. And Rachel, Claire, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on what you've heard, because I do think, sort of like, the individuals you're working with currently within an inpatient setting, so they are there, aren't they? So, and I suppose it's about how we bring that forward. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I think all I was going to say was, I wonder whether we've got the opportunity through volunteering roles with the trust. I don't know whether that would sort of blur the lines a little bit in terms of that co-production, but volunteering roles for our service users initially, because obviously I know within our services we have a lot of peers, a lot of peer workers. I just wondered whether, you know, those volunteering roles would help to sort of bring our service users into that co-production a bit more, because I think the difficulty that we have, and as you've touched on it, you know, we have a lot of one-off contacts with people in custody and in court. So it's mainly sort of around our outreach and reconnect services, whereby we could possibly look at this co-production. But you know, there's a lot of things like you've just said, Betsy, you know, in terms of training and support for our service users, so that they're able to fully understand the role and fully engage in that. But it's definitely something, you know, to think about. moving forward. Yeah.
There's opportunities, I think, over in Health and Justice. You've got Jamie Roberts. I don't know if he's on the call, but sort of Jamie Roberts as a professional lead for lived experience that is that's definitely a really helpful point to kind of bring this together, and that kind of developing that pathway and that kind of thing, and linking in with volunteer opportunities with the trust. That's a gap in forensics at the moment, but we're in the process of recruiting to that post. So really hopeful that will, and that's potentially very much hope that will be a network for people for the services to join up a bit and support each other.
Yeah.
Thanks, Betsy. Thanks, Rachel.
Great. So what I'll do, guys, if anyone else wants to reflect, is I'm just going to pop our email addresses in the chat as well, so that if you do have anything that you can't think of right now, you are more than welcome to reach out and discuss with us any questions or bits and bobs that you'd like to hear about. More than happy to entertain conversations. I'll be quiet and see if anyone else would like to add anything.
Doesn't look like it, Ollie. It looks like you've stunned people into silence.
Yeah, we clearly did a good enough job to answer all the questions, eh? But I just obviously thank you very, very much for joining us today, those that are on the call, and we really appreciate your time and hope that you feel like you've been able to sort of learn a bit about what we do over here. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Betsy and Ollie, and everybody for joining. So I think it's been really, really interesting, really useful. So thank you very much.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.